The climate justice movement is rooted in the civil rights movement as well as the anti-war movements of the 1960s. The climate justice movement can be traced back to the late 1960s and 1970s when the Memphis sanitation strike happened in 1968. This was the first event to link civil rights and environmental safety. Black workers were demanding protection from the lethal working conditions that they were experiencing. Another catalyst event to the movement was the 1982 Warren County protests, which are largely considered the birthplace of the environmental justice movement. This led to 6 weeks of nonviolent civil disobedience.
We will not allow Warren County to become a dump site.
The State Highway Patrol began moving in on the marchers as they approached the entrance to the state landfill. The signs and chants of the protesters made clear their opposition to having the toxic chemical buried in their county.
I don't want this stuff thrown in my water.
We're marching because we do not want this to affect our future.
In the past, environmentalism primarily focused on wilderness and wildlife protection and was largely supported by middle and upper class white individuals. There was contention with environmentalists who were concerned about leisure and recreation, wildlife and wilderness preservation, and pollution, while social justice advocates' major concerns included civil rights, social equity, expanding opportunity, economic mobility, and institutional discrimination. The ideas that those categories could overlap was yet to be popularized. For example, it was found that nationally 3 of the 5 largest commercial hazardous waste landfills are located in areas where Black and Hispanic people comprise a majority of the population. Even when issues of environmental justice started to be breached, the disparate impacts of race were often ignored. The Love Canal was an area in Niagara Falls, New York, where toxic chemicals were dumped into the ground. The people living on that land began to have severe health problems. Despite the gravity of the harm, the requirements to receive help from the government made it so that most Black residents were left to fend for themselves. The environmental justice movement is largely a grassroots-led movement. The principles of democratic organizing are typically seen as the blueprint for the environmental justice structure. These include being inclusive, bottom-up organizing, letting people speak for themselves, and working together in solidarity and mutuality. So this often looks like a horizontal network of independent organizations that collaborate on shared goals. Uprose was founded in 1966 and is Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization. They began as a social service agency and evolved into a nationally recognized powerhouse for climate justice and intergenerational organizing.
Today, we are holding a town hall with the community to discuss solutions that will address the impact of climate change, the possibility of disruption, losing access to our food supply chain.
Social cohesion really starts with the relationships that we already have, the people that we see every day. So we hope that you will join us in the future. Our house is your house. Please come to the Climate Justice Center anytime.
It's really exciting to bring people together because that's also really important in this political game, that people are building with each other, learning with each other, and supporting each other across race and ethnicity around a common vision.
The roots of environmental justice movement started with more direct action, with protests of toxic chemical dumping, rallies, and literal bodies creating a blockade. The Love Canal, as mentioned previously, was led largely by Black mothers, although a white woman got credit for it. Most of the Black families were not evacuated along with the white residents or given financial compensation due to owning a home being a requirement for aid. On the table on the right shows the demographics of the towns and areas surrounding the landfill. As you can see, it is often 50% or more Black residents and often over 50% below the poverty level.
Expect within the next 30 years, the U.S. will see a 25% increase in flooding. But for Black communities, we're talking 40%. And you're going to destroy it with a highway? Oh, hell no. We're going to fight like hell.
Well, Houston is a metropolis,
And we are ground zero for a lot of major issues around dependency on oil and gas, the impact of climate change. Racial redlining was a form of discrimination that denied Black and brown communities loans and mortgages and infrastructure. Those areas that were redlined in the 1930s are the areas that are more prone to flooding, more prone to have more pollution, more prone to have urban heat islands where it's hotter, no green space, no green canopy.
As the movement gained speed, it then turned to more policy-focused and legal reform strategies. Lawsuits using the Civil Rights Act were taken up, as well as drafting new legislation. An example of this is Clinton's executive order, which called for federal actions to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. In more recent times, the movement has shifted towards mutual aid, although direct action protesting and organizing, as well as policy advocacy, is still present. Uprose is a great example of this, focusing on community organizing and creating community-owned solar, a mutual aid tactic that builds power outside of the government systems. The environmental justice movement started off more reformist. With bills passed like the Clinton executive order, strides were made, but within the system of power that was already established. Although this is still pursued in the movement, the mutual aid that has been pivotal in recent years is a reflection of the move towards abolitionist structures. The mindset at first was don't put the landfill in a Black neighborhood, put it somewhere else where it is legal or safe. But it has shifted to environmental racism is a feature of capitalism and colonialism. It is not a glitch or a mistake. Therefore, you can't just reform it. It needs to be replaced. The narrative of events often frames who is seen as important and what is valued. With the environmental justice movement, the roots were heavily co-opted by outsiders. You can see this with the Love Canal, which was narrativized as a movement for the working class. Lois Gibbs became the picture of it. Meanwhile, Black women who were pivotal to the movement, like Agnes Jones, were left behind. Now, as the movement progresses, sovereign narratives are being valued. As Uprose states, the environment is the waterfront, the bus stop, and the apartment. It is no longer just pushing for protected wildlife. It is creating visibility and safety for those in the most vulnerable positions who are often seen as sacrifice zones for pollution. Using digital organizing can create an instantaneous, wide-reaching impact. The Climate Justice Alliance often utilized this strategy and creates accessibility and the ability to access the information anywhere. On the other hand, using on-the-ground organizing is where mutual aid can thrive, as well as community building. Physical aid cannot be given out online. Institutional absorption has occurred in instances mentioned before, like the Clinton executive order, which seemed like a win but lacked necessary components to make real actionable change. The Not in My Backyard movement addressed communities' concerns, mainly white middle-class communities with power, and ended up just shifting the distribution of pollution to those communities with less power, namely Black and brown communities of lower income, turning it to put it in Black backyards. Reflecting on what could be improved within the movement could look like focusing on how the movement can better align with labor unions. It could also look like moving beyond policy and towards infrastructure. True sustainability means that every neighborhood could have a place like Uprose that provides solar power, food, and medical supplies during climate disasters. With the Love Canal, as I mentioned before, justice shouldn't depend on home ownership or wealth. Future strategies must focus on renters' rights as a climate strategy, for example, cooling standards in apartments or protection from displacement. Lastly, social work alignments and collaborations with environmental justice are the person and environment evolution. Traditionally, the environment meant the family or the office, and the movement is arguing that social workers must include the physical and ecological environment in their work. If their home environment is full of mold from a flood or lead from a highway, clearly more than clinical therapy is needed for proper care. Additionally, looking at pollution and climate disasters as institutional caused trauma is key, as social workers recognizing that a client's anxiety or hypervigilance might be a rational response to living in a sacrifice zone. And lastly, focusing on advocacy and mutual aid is an overlap of environmental justice and social work. Social work is uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between clinical needs and macro change. We can help clients navigate the immediate while organizing to change the systemic. Thank you so much for listening.